The doctor handed me my daughter and whispered, "Don't let him near her." That moment, 46 years ago, split my life in two. It wasn't just a warning, it was a sentence, a prophecy, a secret that pressed into my chest like a brand. His words carried the weight of every shadow I had lived through since childhood, and the shadow I was about to pass on if I wasn't careful. But before that moment, before I became a mother at 15, before the miracle that saved me and gave me a reason to keep breathing, there was a little girl. A girl who still thought prayers were heard, who still believed grown-ups told the truth. A girl who would learn too quickly that silence can be the sharpest weapon in a house. My name is Elena Vasquez, and I was born in 1951 in a small New Mexico town that smelled of dust, cattle, and sweat baked into wood. If you've ever lived in a desert town, you know the sound. The cicadas never stop humming, not at night, not even when the world holds its breath. Their chorus was the background of my childhood, a sound that filled the silence. Though in our house, silence was never empty. Silence was dangerous. Silence meant something was brewing. I was the third child of 6, squeezed in the middle like a patch between two pieces of cloth, never fully belonging to the older ones, never small enough to stay protected with the younger ones. My brothers and sisters fought, laughed, stole food from one another's plates, but we all understood one thing without ever saying it out loud. The sound of Papa's truck in the drive could change everything. My father was a laborer. Strong arms from hauling bricks, broad shoulders from carrying lumber, dark eyes that burned even when he wasn't angry, and quick, so quick with his fists that sometimes I thought they moved before he even thought about it. He wasn't the kind of man you argued with. His voice was law, his footsteps thunder, his silence worse than both. My mother, she was always there and never there. A shadow wearing the shape of a woman. She was quiet, withdrawn, always working, never resting. Her hands smelled of onions and soap, her knuckles red from scrubbing, her back bent, like the laundry line sagging under too much weight. Her eyes, soft brown eyes that might have been warm once, were always downcast, always darting away. She had learned to survive by folding herself smaller each year, shrinking until she was nearly invisible. Sometimes I wondered if she thought invisibility would save her. Sometimes I envied her for it. And then there was Manuel, my eldest brother, 17 when I was just 9, already grown, or at least he thought so. He carried himself like a king without a crown, cocky, sharp-tongued, and cruel in ways I didn't understand at first. His hair slicked back with too much grease, his smirk crooked, his eyes daring anyone to challenge him. He liked to remind us younger ones he was the man of the house whenever Papa wasn't home. And we believed him, because sometimes his cruelty looked too much like Papa's. The first memory that tells you everything about our family happened when I was 7. We were crowded around the wobbly table, plates chipped at the edges, tortillas stacked in the center like treasure. I was clumsy. My elbow knocked over the glass of milk. White liquid spilled across the table, dripping onto the dirt floor. My breath caught. Papa's hand struck before I even understood what had happened. The sound was louder than my cry, a clap that seemed to echo off the walls. My cheek burned. Tears came hot and fast. I didn't even have time to whisper, "I'm sorry." My mother's hand slipped me a napkin under the table. Her voice was quick and urgent, a whisper, like smoke. "Hush, Nina. Your father must not hear this. He'll kill you." That was my introduction to fear. Swift, unexpected, and permanent. It lodged itself in my chest and stayed there, humming louder than the cicadas. By the time I was 9, fear wasn't an occasional visitor. He was a roommate. I remember the first time Manuel's shadow fell across my doorway at night. The air was hot, thick with the smell of dirt and onions from the kitchen. My sisters slept beside me, their breathing soft, innocent. The cicadas outside sang their endless chorus. And then his steps. Slow, deliberate. The door creaked. His figure filled the frame. I remember the smell before anything else. The cigarettes he stole from Papa. The sour sweat clinging to his shirt. He leaned close, lips brushing my ear, voice like a blade hidden under velvet. If you tell anyone, I'll make sure Papa knows. And that was enough, because I knew what Papa could do. The years that followed were a blur of half-lived childhood. My friends rode bicycles down the dusty road, braiding each other's hair in the shade of the schoolyard fence. I wore long sleeves in summer. I bit my tongue until it bled just to keep from screaming. I smiled less and less. My laughter shrank until it barely existed. When I was 14, I thought maybe, just maybe, I could tell someone, not Papa, never him, but Mama? Surely she would save me. Surely a mother was meant to protect her daughter. She was at the stove, the iron pot heavy with beans. The air smelled of cumin, onion, and smoke. My heart pounded so hard I thought she would hear it. I tugged at her apron, my small fingers trembling. "Mama," my voice cracked. "Manuel, he hurts me." For a heartbeat, her hand froze in the pot. A heartbeat where hope flared inside me. She would turn. She would take me in her arms. She would stop him. But she didn't turn. Her voice was low, tight, and dangerous. "Hush, Nina. Your father must not hear this. He'll kill you." And then she stirred the beans again, as if nothing had happened. That was the day I learned sometimes mothers can't save you. Sometimes they are prisoners too. I walked outside after that, barefoot on the dirt, cicadas screaming in the trees. I pressed my hands against my chest, feeling my heart hammer. For the first time, I wondered if maybe I would have to save myself. By 14, my prayers had become bargains whispered into the dark. I clutched the small silver cross my grandmother had given me, a thin chain, a fragile thing, and whispered, "Please, God, take me away, or take him away." I whispered until my throat hurt, until the cicadas drowned me out, until sleep dragged me under. But God was silent. And when my belly began to swell at 15, I understood his silence.
I knew before anyone else the mornings where I vomited into the cracked sink, the heaviness in my bones, the way my dresses clung tighter, my reflection in the bathroom mirror was pale, trembling, foreign. I placed both hands on my stomach. "What will Papa do to me?" I whispered to the girl staring back at me. I didn't have to wait long to find out. It was August of 1966. The air pressed down like punishment. Flies gathered at the screen door. The kitchen smelled of beans and stale beer. My mother had tried to hide me in baggy dresses, keeping me from neighbors' eyes, but you can only hide so much. Papa stormed into the kitchen that afternoon, his boots striking the floor like gunshots. His eyes were on the room, sharp and searching, and then they landed on me, on my belly. Fire lit his face. "Whose is it?" he roared. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. My throat closed. My lips moved, but my voice betrayed me. Manuel leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, smirk curling his mouth. He didn't need to speak. His silence spoke louder than any words. Papa's hand struck me before I could breathe. Once, twice. My head rang. Blood filled my mouth. "You shame this family," his voice was thundering. His fists were hail. "You filthy, worthless—" I won't say the word. It still stings. My ribs screamed with each breath, my vision blurred. But worse than the pain was my mother's silence. She stood there, eyes lowered, hands folded in her lap. That night I lay on the hard wooden floor of my room, boards pressing into my back, holding my stomach, whispering to the life inside me. "I'll protect you. Somehow. I promise." I was 15, pregnant, broken, and utterly alone. But here's the thing about secrets. They don't stay buried. When my baby came, the world would know. and the real punishment was only just beginning. When the time came, I was 15, my body barely a woman's but forced to become a mother. I remember thinking that my bones felt too small for what was happening inside me. My hips ached like they were splitting, my hands trembled constantly. The other girls at school whispered about dances and lipstick. I whispered prayers to a God who had stayed silent so long that I wondered if he even heard me anymore. The hospital lights were too bright, too harsh, a buzzing white that made my eyes water. The smell of anesthetic clung to my hair, making me nauseous even between contractions. Every sound echoed, metal trays clinking, the soft scuff of shoes, the hiss of oxygen from somewhere down the hall. My mother was there, silent as always, her hands knotted together in her lap like two frightened birds. My father never came. He had forbidden it. To him, my pregnancy was a shame to be hidden, a wound that must be covered before the neighbors could smell the blood. When my daughter's cry finally filled the air, something inside me cracked open and poured out. Pain, yes, but also a flood of love so fierce it felt like fire. I had never felt anything like it. Tiny fists, tiny breasts, eyes squinting shut against the light. I wanted to name her Esperanza, hope, because that's what she felt like. I hoped that maybe all the ugliness behind me could end with her. I hoped that maybe life could still be kind, if only to her. But before I could even whisper her name, the doctor leaned close. His face was lined, his eyes tired, but his voice held a sharpness that cut through my haze. He said, "Don't let him near her." He didn't need to say who. I knew. Everyone in that room must have known, even if they never spoke it. Manuel had taken my childhood. He could not have her too. In that moment, something in me hardened. For the first time, I felt like a wall instead of a doorway. For the first time, I felt like a mother. We left the hospital quietly, like thieves in the night. No flowers, no photos, no baptism at the church. My father forbade any announcement. No neighbors were told. My daughter's birth was a secret wrapped in shame, a child erased before she even existed. But to me, she was everything. Her cries in the night were music. Her tiny fists curling around mine were salvation. When I fed her, rocking in the dark, I felt as if the whole world shrunk down to the two of us. Her warm body against my chest, her breath soft and steady, my heartbeat promising her over and over, "I will protect you. I will protect you." But Manuel saw her as a leverage. He had always been a predator, but now he had found his perfect trap. I was 16 when he came into my room one night, his eyes narrowed, his voice sharp. My daughter slept in a basket beside my bed, her curls damp from the summer heat. "You think that baby makes you free?" he sneered. "You belong to me, Elena. Don't forget it." I hugged my daughter tight, shaken, whispering prayers against her hair. I didn't answer him. I couldn't. Words felt useless, like pebbles thrown at a wall. From that day, Manuel's control grew heavier. He used her as a chain. "If you ever tell Papa the truth, if you ever try to run, I'll take her from you. I'll make sure she disappears."
That threat kept me caged. He didn't need locks. He had her. But even a bird in a cage dreams of the sky. I began to watch for cracks in the walls. I began to listen for the sound of keys. My first attempt to escape came when I was 17. There was an older neighbor, Senora Lopez, who sometimes smiled kindly at me over the fence. She had a soft, round face, hair streaked with silver, and a way of speaking that made me feel, for a moment, like a child again, like someone might actually care. One evening, while Manuel was out, I whispered through the slats, my voice trembling so hard I could barely form the words. "Please, help me. I need to leave." Her eyes softened. She glanced over her shoulder, then leaned closer. "Mija, come tomorrow morning. I'll take you to my sister in Albuquerque. She will hide you. You'll be safe." For the first time in years, I felt hope spark like a match in the dark. All night I packed and repacked the small bundle of clothes for my daughter, tucking her blanket into my bag like a talisman. I lay awake imagining the smell of a new city, the taste of freedom, the feel of a day where Manuel's shadow couldn't reach me. But Manuel was watching,
always watching. The next morning, before I could even gather my daughter's blanket, he blocked the door. His smile was cold, his eyes glittering. "Where do you think you're going?" His voice was poisonous. I froze. My daughter whimpered on my hip. He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a whisper that felt like a slap. "If you ever talk to her again," he said, jerking his chin towards Senora Lopez's yard, "I'll make sure Papa beats the baby instead of you." He held my gaze until I looked away. Then he walked out, whistling, as if nothing had happened. A week later, Senora Lopez's family moved away. I never knew if they left because of me or if it was just the way life shifted, but it felt like hope had been boxed up and driven off in their moving truck. The second attempt came a year later, at 18. By then I had learned to hide my desperation better, but inside I was afire. I had saved pennies from scrubbing floors for neighbors, hiding the coins in the hem of my skirt. Every clink of a coin into that secret hiding place felt like a heartbeat of freedom. One night, I gathered my daughter, now 3 years old, heavy and sleepy in my arms, and crept to the bus station. I still remember the smell of diesel, the distant hum of engines, the flicker of fluorescent lights on cracked tile floors. I still remember the taste of freedom on my tongue, bitter and sweet, like a green apple not yet ripe. I reached the ticket window, my hand shaking as I pulled the coins from my hem. Then a hand gripped my shoulder like iron. It was my father. He didn't say a word as he dragged me back to the truck. My daughter cried in my arms, her little face pressed against my neck, her tears warm on my skin. I held her tighter, whispering, "Shh," though I was the one who wanted to cry. When we got inside, the storm broke. His fists fell, each strike echoing like thunder in that small house. "You shame me again," he roared. "You think you can leave this family? Never!" His words were spit, his face red, his hands unrelenting. I curled around my daughter, trying to shield her, but she saw it all. Her tiny voice rose like a bell. "Stop, Papa! Stop hurting Nama!" Her words were like knives, not because they hurt me, but because she thought I was her mother. And in many ways, I was. I was the only mother she had ever known. And yet inside me, guilt burned like acid. She deserved the truth. She deserved safety. And I couldn't give her either. That night, my body ached in places I didn't know could ache. Purple bruises blossomed under my skin like poison flowers. My daughter's small hands pressed them, confused, trying to soothe. I kissed her forehead and whispered, "I'm okay." Though I wasn't. I wasn't even close. But even in that pit of despair, cracks began to form around the walls, cracks where light seeped in, tiny and soft. Because the first ally appeared when my daughter fell sick at 4 years old, a fever that wouldn't break. Her skin as hot as a stove, her eyes glassy. My father barked at me to get her to the clinic, but he wouldn't touch her. He hated weakness in any form, even a child's. We rushed her to the small clinic on the edge of town. The air there smelled of bleach and hope, a strange mix. A nurse, young, maybe in her 20s, looked at me closely as she examined my child. Her eyes lingered on my bruises, my trembling hands, my daughter's thin arms. She didn't say anything at first, but I saw a question form behind her eyes, a flicker of anger. When my father stepped out to speak with the doctor, she leaned close and whispered, "You don't deserve this. There are places for women like you, shelters, churches, people who will protect you." Her words lit something inside me, a possibility I had never dared to imagine. For a moment, I saw myself leaving, saw my daughter running in a yard without fences, saw a room where no one raised their voice. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to reach for that life with both hands. But then I looked at my father pacing outside the window, at Manuel smirking in the corner like a cat watching a bird in a cage, and I swallowed my hope. I couldn't risk my daughter's life on a whisper. not yet. The years crawled on. My daughter grew, her curls bouncing as she ran, her laughter piercing through the gloom of our house like a shaft of sunlight through a dirty window. She called me Mama, and I never corrected her. To her, I was both mother and sister, protector and prisoner. But inside me, guilt burned. Every day I feared the truth would find her. Every night I prayed she would never know. I prayed that whatever darkness lived in Manuel would die with me, not pass into her veins.
By the late 1970s, I was in my 20s, but I felt centuries old. I carried secrets like stones in my chest, heavy and unmovable. My back ached from work, my eyes from crying, my heart from hope deferred. And yet there was a shift. Small, almost invisible, but real. My father's health began to falter. His once booming voice cracked into coughs. His fists slowed. Manuel grew restless, angrier, as if the power slipping from Papa's hands needed somewhere else to land. And it always landed on me. But here's the strange thing about life. Sometimes the very tragedies that break you are the ones that set you free. Sometimes death wears the face of deliverance. I didn't know it then, but the tide was turning. A storm was coming that would sweep me out of that house once and for all. Because my real chance to leave would not come through neighbors or bus stations or whispered promises. It would come wrapped in death. By the time the 1980s came, I was no longer a girl. I was a woman in my 30s, though the mirror told a different story. Sunken cheeks, eyes too old for my age, shoulders stooped from years of carrying burdens no one should have to bear. Lines carved themselves into my forehead like etchings on stone. When I smiled, which was rare, it always looked borrowed, like a dress that didn't fit. My daughter was 15 by then, bright-eyed and clever, always asking questions I didn't know how to answer. She had Manuel's black hair, but none of his cruelty, and every day I prayed that his shadow had not touched her soul. Her laugh was still pure, a sound like bells, though sometimes I caught her staring at me with a kind of watchfulness that made me ache, as if she sensed I was a dam holding back a flood and feared the moment it might burst. And then death came to our house. It was my father. One night, he collapsed at the dinner table, his spoon clattering against the chipped plate, his hand clutching his chest. His face turned gray, his breath rattled like a rusted chain, and in the space of a heartbeat, the man who ruled our lives with iron fists was reduced to a gasping shadow. My mother screamed, a sound I had never heard from her lips. Manuel leapt up, but not to help. He just stood there, frozen, eyes wide, as if the earth had cracked beneath him. The doctors called it a heart attack. I remember standing in the church days later, the smell of candles and lilies thick in the air, choking me. The pews were filled with neighbors, people who nodded solemnly as though my father had been a pillar of the community, as though they hadn't heard the shouting, the crashes, the whispers that leaked through the walls of our house for decades. My mother wept quietly, bent low like a reed in a storm. Manuel stood tall, chest puffed, as if he had inherited a throne. But me? I felt nothing. No tears, no sorrow, only the faintest flicker of something I hadn't dared to feel in years. Possibility. Because with Papa gone, one of my chains had finally snapped. Yet freedom did not come with his death. Manuel grew worse. Without our father's shadow to compete with, he expanded like poison filling a room. His voice grew louder, his fists quicker, his cruelty sharper. He became both jailer and judge, prowling the house like he owned not just the walls, but the air we breathed. "You're nothing without me," he spat one night, slamming his palm against the wall beside my head, the plaster cracking beneath the force. His breath stank of liquor, his eyes were two pits of fire. "You're nothing without me, and don't you forget it. That child, you think she's yours? She's mine to claim whenever I want." The words burned through me like acid. My daughter slept in the next room, the rhythm of her breathing faint through the thin walls.
I clutched her small hand in the dark later that night and whispered into the stillness, so low even she couldn't hear. If I don't leave now, I never will. But even then, fear held me in its claws. Fear of Manuel, fear of being hunted, fear of a world I did not understand. It was my mother who gave me the push, though I don't think she ever knew it. She'd had grown weaker after Papa's death, her body folding in on itself like paper left out in the rain. One evening, as she lay in bed with her breath shallow and her skin pale as wax, she reached for my hand. Her fingers were trembling, cold, but her eyes burned with a rare intensity. Vete, Elena, go. Don't waste your life here like I did. Her words were both blessing and a goodbye. A week later, she was gone too. The house grew hollow without her presence, though she had never raised her voice or fought back. Even her silence had been something I leaned on, a reminder that someone else was enduring alongside me. Without her, Manuel raged unchecked. He drank more, slammed doors harder, cursed louder. Every night, the walls seemed to close in tighter, the air thicker, my hope smaller. It was then I decided I wouldn't just dream of leaving, I would do it. It was the winter of 1985. My daughter was almost 16, her eyes wide with a mixture of innocence and suspicion. She knew something was breaking inside me, though I never said a word. One night, as the desert wind howled outside and Manuel passed out drunk on the sofa, I packed a small bag. Just a few clothes, a photograph of my mother, and my grandmother's silver cross that I had hidden for years in the lining of a drawer. I woke my daughter gently. "Shh, mija," I whispered. "We're going for a walk." She rubbed her eyes, confused but trusting. We slipped out the back door, hearts pounding, feet bare against the frozen ground. The night was moonless, the sky a black shroud scattered with stars. Every crunch of gravel beneath our feet sounded like thunder. I expected at any moment to hear Manuel's roar behind us, but the house stayed silent. We reached the bus station shivering, breath visible in the icy air. The fluorescent lights flickered above us, buzzing like angry insects. My hands shook as I slid the coins I had saved onto the counter. For once, they were enough. 2 tickets, one way, to Albuquerque. When the bus pulled away, the desert shrinking behind us, I pressed my forehead against the cold glass. Tears streamed down my cheeks, hot against the chill. My daughter leaned into me, her hair smelling of smoke and childhood, her voice a whisper. "Where are we going, Mama?" And for the first time in my life, I answered honestly, "To freedom, mija, to freedom." But freedom was not what I imagined. The city was loud, harsh, and unforgiving. Skyscrapers loomed like indifferent giants. Streets choked with cars and strangers. I had no money, no family, no plan. We stayed in a cheap motel for 3 nights, the sheets scratchy and the walls thin, until the last of my coins vanished. After that, we were on the streets. I found work scrubbing floors, washing dishes, cleaning toilets, anything that paid in cash. My hands blistered, my back screamed, but at least no one raised their hand to me. At least no one called me worthless. We ate bread that was a day old, soup that was mostly water. My daughter's shoes wore holes in them. Some nights, when the cold cut too deep, we huddled together in bus stations, pretending to wait for a bus that never came, just to stay warm. But even then, she would smile, her eyes bright, and say, "At least we're together, Mama." Those words were like balm. They made every hunger pang worth it. Our second true ally appeared when I least expected it. Her name was Mrs. Ramirez, a widow in her 60s who owned a small grocery store on the corner of a busy street. I was sweeping the sidewalk outside one day. my daughter sitting on the curb, tracing shapes in the dust with a stick, when she came out to dump a bucket of water. She studied me for a moment, her eyes sharp but not unkind. She studied me for a moment, her eyes sharp but not unkind. "You need a place?" she asked, her voice blunt, no nonsense. I froze, then nodded, too ashamed to speak. Her gaze flicked to my daughter, then back to me. She sighed, wiped her hands on her apron. "I've got a room upstairs. Small. Needs work. You clean my store, help with stocking, and you can stay. Cheap rent. Deal?" I could barely breathe. It was more mercy than I deserved. "See," I whispered. "Deal." That tiny apartment above her store, with its peeling wallpaper, leaky faucet, and squeaky floorboards, felt like a palace. For the first time in my life, I could lock a door and know Manuel wasn't on the other side. My daughter ran circles in the little room, laughing, her voice echoing off the walls. I sat on the bed, hands pressed to my face, weeping in gratitude. But shadows don't vanish overnight. They linger, seeping into corners, whispering in the dark. My daughter grew restless, her questions sharper as she grew older. "Why don't we have family photos?" she asked one night, her eyes narrowed as she sorted through the small box of things we carried. "Why don't you ever tell me about my father?" she pressed another time, her voice soft but insistent. I dodged. I lied. I told half-truths dressed in pretty words. But she was 15, clever, and her questions became harder to avoid. One night, as we sat on the floor eating beans and tortillas by the light of a single lamp, she set her plate down and looked straight at me. "Mama, who is my father? Why don't we ever talk about him?" My heart stopped. The walls seemed to close in. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator downstairs, the shuffle of Mrs. Ramirez's footsteps in the store below, the faint whistle of the wind through the cracks in the window. Everything was too loud and too quiet all at once.
I stared at her, my mind racing. I wanted to tell her. I wanted to spill every scar, every secret, every nightmare. I wanted to say, "Your father is a monster. He hurt me. He hurt us. And the blood in your veins comes from both me and him." But how could I? How could I crush her innocence with the truth? Her eyes waited, wide, searching, desperate for something to hold on to. So I did the only thing I thought might save her. I lied. "Your father," I whispered, forcing a smile I didn't feel. "He died before you were born. He was a kind man, but God took him too soon." Her face softened with sadness. She reached for my hand, her small fingers warm against my cold skin. "I'm sorry, Mama." And in that moment, I knew this lie would follow me forever. Because sometimes lies aren't told to protect yourself. Sometimes they're the only way to protect the ones you love. The 1990s came, and with them something I had never dared dream of before: stability. After years of running, of hunger, of waking each night with my heart hammering at every creak of the floorboards, life finally began to soften. It was not perfect, not by any stretch, but it was steady, and to me, steady was a miracle. My daughter finished high school, the first in our family to ever hold a diploma. I still remember sitting in the audience, on the folding chairs, my palms sweating, my heart swollen as I watched her cross that stage. The gym smelled of popcorn and floor wax. The principal's voice echoed through a crackling microphone, and when her name was called, I thought my chest might split open. "Elena Vasquez's daughter," they announced, though they did not know me, not really. But when she walked across that stage, shoulders straight, smile wide, she looked like hope personified. My hands clapped until they stung. I blinked back tears, hiding them in my sleeves. She glanced at me from the stage, and I knew she had made it farther than I had ever dared to dream. Meanwhile, I worked long hours at Mrs. Ramirez's store, saved every coin I could, and eventually found a better job cleaning offices at night. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady work, and steady meant rent paid on time, groceries in the fridge, shoes that fit. I scrubbed carpets, emptied trash bins, wiped down desks that belonged to people who would never know my name, and I did it with gratitude. Each paycheck was a small piece of dignity returned to me. We even began to buy secondhand furniture, piece by piece, as if assembling a real life from scraps. A mismatched set of chairs, a sofa with one leg shorter than the rest that wobbled whenever you sat on it, a dresser whose drawers always stuck, no matter how much wax I rubbed on the rails. But to me, that little apartment, cluttered and patched together, was a palace. To my daughter, it was something better. It was a home. For years, our world was just the two of us. I had resigned myself to the idea that love, the kind of love that did not bruise, did not suffocate, did not punish, wasn't meant for women like me. I had lost too much faith in men to believe one could exist who would not use me as a cage. And then, somehow, love walked back into my life again. His name was Jorge, a kind man who delivered supplies to the grocery store. He was not flawless. His hands were rough and calloused from years of labor, his laugh too loud at times, his Spanish tinged with the accent of northern Mexico. But when he looked at me, he didn't see a woman broken by her past. He saw a person. He saw me. At first, I pushed him away. Trust had been beaten out of me too many times. When he lingered at the counter and making small talk, I answered in clipped sentences. When he offered to carry heavy boxes for me, I told him no. My walls were high, and I believed they kept me safe. But Jorge was patient. He didn't push. He simply stayed. He fixed a leaky faucet in the apartment one afternoon when he noticed me struggling with a wrench. He brought tamales for dinner once, saying he had made too many. He taught my daughter how to ride a bike in the cracked parking lot behind the store, jogging beside her as she wobbled, his laughter booming when she finally let go of the handlebars and coasted free. Little by little, he slipped into our lives. He became a constant presence, one I eventually realized I didn't dread. In fact, I began to wait for him. One evening, as we sat on the stoop, watching the sun sink behind the city's low rooftops, he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small and shining. The necklace, my grandmother's silver cross. "You dropped this weeks ago at the store," he said softly, placing it into my palm. It looked too precious to be lost. I stared at it, my throat tightening. That tiny heirloom had survived everything. The rage of my father, the fists of Manuel, the hunger of the city. It was the only piece of my past I had carried into freedom. And when it had slipped from me, I hadn't even noticed. Now it rested in my palm again, warm from his touch, gleaming in the fading light. It felt like a blessing. From that day forward, Jorge was no longer just a visitor. He became part of us. Laughter began to fill our kitchen, echoing off those thin apartment walls. My daughter called him Papa within a year, though he never asked her to. It came naturally, like water finding its way downhill. Together we built a life. Church on Sundays, family dinners around the wobbly table, birthdays with store-bought cakes that tasted sweeter than any feast I had ever known. And when our little boy was born in 1995, I thought maybe, just maybe, the curse of my past had been broken. His cries filled the apartment, sharp and beautiful, and I held him against my chest with tears spilling down my cheeks. A child born not of violence or fear, but of love. My daughter held him too, cradling him with awe, whispering, "Mi hermanito,"
as if she had been waiting for him her whole life. For years, I let myself believe the past was behind me, that I had built enough new walls, stacked enough bricks of joy and safety to keep it sealed away forever. Jorge never pressed me about my history. He sensed the shadows, but did not chase them. Instead, he gave me space, gave me warmth, gave me a place to rest my head without fear. But curses do not vanish simply because you refuse to speak their names. Shadows linger, no matter how bright the light. Every time my daughter asked about her father, I repeated the same lie. He was a kind man, but he died before you were born. Every time Jorge looked at me with his gentle eyes and said, "You can tell me anything, mi amor," I kissed his cheek and swallowed the truth like poison. I told myself I was shielding them, that if I buried the past deep enough, if I locked the truth in the darkest corner of my soul, no one would ever dig it up. But shadows have a way of clawing their way back to the surface. One evening in the early 2000s, the smell of onions and cumin filled the apartment as I stirred a pot on the stove. Jorge sat at the table with our little boy, now a curious school-aged child, helping him with arithmetic homework. Their voices rose and fell in laughter as he tried to teach his son how to count beans on the table. My daughter, now a young woman, her hair long and dark like mine had once been, sat quietly at the end of the table. She wasn't laughing. She wasn't joining in. She was watching me, watching with eyes too sharp, too knowing. I felt her gaze like a weight on my shoulders. Finally, her voice broke the warmth of the moment. "Mama," she said softly, her fork clinking against her plate, "if my father was so kind, why don't we have a single picture of him?" The room went still. The simmering of the pot on the stove was suddenly the loudest sound in the world. Jorge glanced up, his brow furrowing. Our little boy looked from his sister to me, sensing the shift, though not understanding. I froze, the wooden spoon trembling in my hand. My daughter's eyes did not waver. She was no longer a child who accepted stories as truth. She was a woman now, and she knew lies when she heard them. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. My throat ached. My chest tightened. For 20 years, I had clung to this lie like armor, believing it protected us all. And now, in the dim light of that kitchen, I saw the cracks in the armor splitting wide. Her question was simple, but it was also everything. Why no picture? Why no memory? Why nothing to prove the man I claimed had once existed? And in that instant, I realized the lie I thought had saved us was about to destroy everything. By the time the 2000s turned into the 2010s, my children were grown, and the house that had once been filled with school books and backpacks now echoed with a quieter rhythm. My daughter, my firstborn, the child who once clung to me in the darkness when I had nothing to give but trembling arms, had become a teacher. Not just any teacher, but one who fought for children the way I had once prayed for anyone to fight for me. I would watch her prepare lessons at the kitchen table, her brow furrowed, her pen moving quickly across stacks of paper. She had a patience I never had at her age, a fierce streak that reminded me of the girl I once wished I could have been. In her, I saw both the child I had been and the protector I had longed for. My son, the boy Jorge and I had brought into the world with laughter instead of violence, grew tall and strong, his shoulders broad from years of honest labor. He followed Jorge into work with his hands, learning the trade of building, repairing, lifting. He whistled while he worked, always humming some tune he claimed to invent on the spot. His kindness ran deeper than his strength, though. He was the kind of man who stopped to help an old neighbor carry groceries, who picked up his nephew after school without being asked,
who kissed the crown of my head when he came to visit, even when he towered over me like a tree. And then came the grandchildren. Oh, the joy of it! It felt as though God himself had decided to pour light into the cracks of my soul. Tiny feet pattered across my floors. Sticky hands tugged at my dress, leaving smears of jelly and paint, but never once bothering me. High voices squealed, "Abuela! Abuela!" until I thought my heart would burst from being so full.
The house that I had once feared, the very idea of a home with its doors that could lock and rooms that could trap, had become something entirely different. It was no longer a place of shadows and silence. It was a sanctuary, a living, breathing heart filled with crayons scattered across the floor, plastic toys underfoot, the smell of warm tortillas mingling with bubble soap and crayons. At night, when I tucked them in for sleepovers, I would read stories, my voice trembling sometimes, but steadied by their trust. "Another one, abuela, please," they would beg, their little faces glowing in the lamplight. And I would keep going until my throat ached, until their eyelids finally closed. I thought perhaps this was enough. Perhaps I could go to my grave never speaking the truth, never breaking the fragile shell of the life I had so carefully built. But life does not allow secrets to sleep forever. With the joy of grandchildren came the sharp edge of a question I could no longer silence. One evening I sat on the old armchair that had been with me for years. My daughter sat beside me, rocking her own little girl, her firstborn, in her arms. She moved slowly, the way mothers do when they know rocking is less about lulling the baby and more about steadying themselves. Her eyes, so serious, looked at me, eyes too much like mine once were, eyes that held both wonder and burden. "Mama," she said softly, and already my heart knew what was coming. "Why don't you ever talk about my father, the real one?" Her words were gentle, but they landed like stones against glass. I wanted to lie again. I could almost feel the words rising up in my throat, the same ones I had spoken for 20 years. "He was kind. He died young. You were too little to remember." Lies rehearsed so well, they almost sounded like truth. My tongue burned to say them, to wrap us both in the safety of the old story. But I was tired, Afreen, so very tired. Tired of carrying a stone in my chest for 50 years. Tired of living in two worlds, the smiling grandmother who baked cookies and braided hair, and the broken girl inside who still remembered the sound of fists on walls, the taste of fear on her tongue, the shattering silence of no one coming to help. So I told her. Not every detail, not the darkest corners. I could not. Some things belonged to the shadows, and perhaps always would. But I told her enough. Enough for her to understand why I had run, why I had lied, why I had fought so hard to build a safe life for her. Enough for her to know that her birth was not a mistake, not a shameful accident, but the very reason I found the courage to flee. She listened without interruption. Her daughter's breath was soft against her shoulder, and tears rolled silently down her cheeks. She did not cry for herself. She did not cry out of anger at me. She cried for the girl I had once been, the girl I had hidden from her all those years. And then she did something that broke me and healed me in the same breath. She reached out, took my hand with her free one, kissed it softly, and whispered, "You were never weak, Mama. You were brave. And now I understand everything you sacrificed for me." I could not speak. My chest shook. My eyes blurred. For 50 years I had carried this burden,
believing if I spoke it aloud, it would shatter everything I had built. And yet in telling it, I had not lost her, I had gained her. The necklace, that silver cross my grandmother once pressed into my hand, the heirloom that had followed me through every storm, sits today around my granddaughter's neck. I gave it to her on her 15th birthday, the same age I had been when my world first shattered. Only this time, it was not a curse being passed down. It was a blessing, a reminder, a promise. "This is yours now," I told her, fastening it gently as her long hair spilled over my trembling hands. She touched it, her young fingers tracing the silver. "It's beautiful, Abuela," she whispered, her eyes shining. Now I am 73 years old. My body is slower, my hands tremble when I braid my granddaughter's hair, my knees ache when I rise from the chair, my breath catches when I climb the stairs. But my heart is freer than it has ever been, because the miracle of my life was never just escaping. It was not only about surviving the fists, the silences, the hunger. The miracle was believing, finally, that I deserved freedom, that I deserved love, that I deserved to be here telling you this story. And so if you are listening now, whether from the quiet of your bedroom, the back of a bus, or a kitchen like mine once was, if you are listening with a secret lodged in your throat, hear me. You are not broken, you are not worthless, and you do not need to wait 50 years for your miracle.
It begins the moment you believe you deserve better. That was my miracle, and it can be yours too. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Subscribe and walk with me through more stories of strength, survival, and miracles. Together, we can break the silence.